There's a type of person who smiles while something inside them is disintegrating. They agree when they don't want to agree, say yes when they need to say no, change the subject when conversations get uncomfortable. And over time, this person becomes unrecognizable even to themselves. What's curious about this pattern is that it operates under the banner of virtue. People like this are celebrated. They're called kind, easy to deal with, understanding. But there's something operating in this dynamic that's rarely examined. The world treats kindness as if it were always pure, as if being nice was synonymous with being good. But when the behavior of excessively kind people is observed systematically over time, a different pattern emerges. They don't end up in the positions they deserve, don't have the relationships they imagined building. Many end up alone, exhausted, with a list of people who hurt them and whom they secretly resent. And the question nobody asks is simple. How does someone so dedicated to pleasing others end up so distant from them? This paradox isn't accidental. There's a specific psychological mechanism at work. People who avoid conflict at all costs, who prioritize harmony over honesty, who systematically place others' needs above their own, aren't doing this out of pure generosity. They're responding to something, to an internal logic that was installed at some point in development. And this logic has consequences that only become visible years later. This isn't moral judgment. It's not that these people are weak or naive. It's that they developed a specific strategy for social navigation, a strategy that seemed to work when it was adopted, that brought immediate relief from something perceived as threatening. But psychological strategies have costs, and the cost of this one specifically only reveals itself in its totality when it's too late to simply stop. What will be analyzed here isn't a list of symptoms to identify in others. It's a complete behavioral pattern, from its formation to its most destructive manifestations. Because understanding how genuinely kind people end up psychologically fragmented requires examining not just the behavior itself, but the function it serves. And that function is rarely what it seems at first glance. But to understand why this happens, we must first examine where this pattern begins, how it gets installed, and why, even causing so much damage, it persists. The pattern installs itself gradually. Nobody consciously decides to become this way. It happens in small responses that accumulate until they become the only way of existing the person knows. And it normally starts early, very early. Before there are words to name what's happening, a child expresses something, a preference, discomfort, a desire. And something in the environment responds in a way that codes this expression as risky. It doesn't need to be violence, doesn't need to be dramatic abandonment. Sometimes it's just a look of disappointment, a sigh, a tone of voice that changes. The message that arrives is clear even without being spoken. Expressing what you want can cost something you can't afford to lose. So the child adjusts, agrees when they'd prefer to disagree, smiles when they'd prefer to retreat, says everything's fine when it's not. And something interesting happens. The tension decreases, the environment calms down. The person who seemed about to pull away becomes close again, and the brain registers this as a solution, as an effective strategy. If I don't bother, I'm safe. If I agree, I'm loved. If I put the other first, I won't be left behind. This doesn't happen once, it happens repeatedly, in different situations but with the same emotional structure. And each time the strategy works, each time agreeing brings immediate relief, the pattern strengthens. Until it's no longer a choice, it becomes reflex. The person doesn't even notice they're doing it anymore. Just feels automatic discomfort when they need to disagree. An anxiety that arises when thinking about expressing their own need. A diffuse fear that saying no will destroy everything. What seems like developed kindness, gentleness as character trait, is actually something more specific. It's a psychological solution to a problem that was presented too early to be processed any other way. Vulnerability was associated with loss. Authenticity was coded as dangerous, and the mask of pleasant person became the only way to maintain bonds that seemed too fragile to withstand truth. But once this pattern is installed, it doesn't stay contained, doesn't operate in just one area of life. It expands and begins to manifest in very specific ways that go unnoticed by everyone, including the person themselves. Observe someone like this in a simple situation. Someone asks where they want to eat. The answer comes quickly. Doesn't matter, whatever you prefer, I'm open to anything. It seems like flexibility, seems like generosity, but it's neither. It's the inability to occupy space with their own preference. It's the automatic fear that expressing desire will create tension they don't know how to handle. When someone asks for help, the yes comes out before even processing if they have time, energy, or capacity. There's no pause to consider, no internal check. The body has already responded, because refusing is felt as violation of something fundamental, as if they were saying no to themselves as a person, not just to that specific request. And so they do things they don't want to do, commit to situations that drain them, and maintain the mask of constant availability while something inside is being consumed. In difficult conversations, there's a recognizable pattern. As soon as the tone changes, as soon as the possibility of disagreement arises, the person deflects, laughs at something that hurt them, changes subject, minimizes what they feel, says it's not important when it is, and if someone insists, if someone really tries to know what's happening, the answers become even vaguer. Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. I understand your side. The ability to express discomfort was trained out of existence. What's most interesting is that these people become experts at anticipating. They perceive subtle changes in others' moods before the other person notices. Adjust behavior preventively. Offer things before being asked, not because they genuinely want to do this, but because detecting and resolving tension before it appears is the only way they feel they have any control. It's like living in permanent state of negotiation, with the possibility of rejection. What seems like just a way of being reveals a much more complex dynamic, but there's something operating behind these manifestations that's rarely named. A specific psychological function that explains why the pattern persists even when it's clearly causing harm. Something needs to be examined more carefully. If this behavior causes so much suffering, why does it continue? Why does someone persist in something that clearly isn't working? The answer isn't what it seems, and when finally seen with clarity, it completely changes the understanding of everything that came before. People like this don't agree with everything because they deeply care about others. They agree because they deeply care about what others think of them. The distinction seems subtle, but it's everything. One is about others' well-being. The other is about their own emotional safety. And what's operating here is the second, always has been. When someone says yes to everything, never expresses discomfort, avoids any form of confrontation, what's being protected isn't the other's peace, it's their own image. Because disagreeing, refusing, expressing need, all of this carries a risk. The risk of being seen as difficult, as selfish, as problematic. And for someone whose emotional security depends on being perceived as good, this risk is unbearable. The real function of this pattern isn't generosity, it's control. Control over how others see you. If you never say no, nobody can call you selfish. If you never confront, nobody can accuse you of being difficult. If you always put others first, you guarantee you'll be seen as a good person. And it's this guarantee that's being sought. Not genuine connection, not mutual care, but the certainty that the image is preserved. This isn't conscious. Nobody wakes up thinking, I'm going to manipulate how people see me today. The process is automatic, but the underlying motivation remains. Each agreement, each avoidance, each suppression of their own need is serving the same function. Keep the mask intact, because without it, without the identity of pleasant person, what remains? The fear is that nothing remains that's worth being loved. What's called excessive kindness often reveals itself as something closer to its opposite. It's obsessive concern with oneself disguised as concern for others. It's selfishness that learned to dress as altruism. And the more the person insists they're just trying to be good, the clearer it becomes they're trying to be seen as good. The difference isn't semantic, it's structural. And when this function is finally understood, when it becomes clear the pattern isn't about caring but about controlling perception, the consequences make much more sense. Because a strategy built around image management can't produce real connection. It can only produce sophisticated isolation. There's a moment that arrives without warning. The person simply isn't there anymore. The relationship ends without confrontation, without explanation. One day they were present, agreeing, smiling, available. The next day, gone. Phone doesn't answer. Messages go unanswered. Invitations are declined with vague excuses. And whoever's left on the other side doesn't understand, because from their perspective, everything was fine. always has been. What they don't see is what was happening inside. Each time the person agreed when they wanted to disagree, something accumulated. Each time they smiled while something hurt them, an account was registered. Each situation where they put the other first, while their own needs were completely ignored, an emotional debt was recorded. But this debt was never communicated, never brought out, was just filed internally in a growing list of resentments nobody else knew existed, because the problem with never saying no isn't that you do things you don't want to do. The problem is you start blaming people for asking, even when they have no way of knowing you don't want to. Even when you said yes with a smile, they come to be seen as exploiters, as selfish, as people who take advantage. And the resentment grows not just for what they did, but for what they failed to notice, for their blindness in not seeing your silent sacrifice. And then comes the breaking point. It's not dramatic. There's no final confrontation. The person simply stops responding, stops showing up, stops pretending, and disappears from relationships as if they never existed, because continuing would require finally telling the truth, would require expressing years of accumulated frustrations, and that seems impossible. Easier to just leave, delete the whole problem instead of trying to solve it. On the other side, people are confused. Some are hurt. They try to understand what they did wrong, send messages asking if everything's okay, if they did something, if they can talk, and the answer they get, when they get one, is always the same. Everything's fine, just busy. Nothing happened. The irony is that even in the moment of leaving, even when they've already decided the relationship is over, they still can't tell the truth, still protect the image, still avoid conflict. What was a strategy to keep people close ends up being exactly what pushes them away. Not through honesty, not through resolution, but through silent abandonment. And the cycle repeats. New person, same dynamic, same invisible accumulation, same inexplicable disappearance. What does it mean to know someone? Not in the superficial sense of knowing where they work or what music they like, but really know what scares them, what hurts them, what they need when they're vulnerable. For most people, this comes with time, with conversations, with moments where the mask drops and something true appears. But for those who live agreeing with everything, this moment never comes. Everyone around has an impression. They know the person is kind, helpful, easy to deal with, but if questioned about who this person really is, about what they feel, about what they want from life, the answers get vague. Because this information was never offered. The person is always there, always available, always smiling, but somehow remains completely invisible. Not because they're ignored, but because they chose not to be seen. And there's cruel irony in this. The person spends years anticipating others' needs, perceiving mood changes, adjusting behavior to accommodate others. But nobody does the same for them, not because they're cruel, but because they were never taught there was something to perceive. The message was always, "I'm fine, don't worry about me, I understand." And so people believed everything was fine, believed there were no needs, believed the mask. Until one day something changes. Maybe the person finally hits a limit. Maybe they're so exhausted they can't maintain the facade anymore. And for the first time, they express a need, ask for something, say they're not okay, and the reaction they get is disconcerting. People are surprised, some are uncomfortable, because this version of the person doesn't fit the image they had. And what's even worse, some react as if the person is being selfish, as if they're breaking an unspoken agreement, as if they're asking for too much. And in this moment, everything is confirmed, the belief that installed the pattern from the beginning. That vulnerability is dangerous, that expressing need leads to rejection, that the only way to be loved is not to bother, because finally, after years hiding who they really are, when they try to appear, when they try to be seen, the response they get is exactly what they always feared, that there's something wrong with needing, that their real version isn't welcome. What began as strategy to maintain connection created the deepest form of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still completely invisible, of having relationships where everyone knows the mask, but nobody touched the person behind it. There's a difference that's rarely named, between agreeing because you don't want conflict and accepting because you're truly aligned, between saying yes to avoid discomfort and saying yes because you genuinely want to, between being pleasant and being honest. The first is about maintaining appearances, The second is about maintaining integrity, and only one of them can be sustained without disintegration. Being pleasant is easy when it costs nothing, when all it requires is smiling, agreeing, not making waves. But real relationships eventually demand more. They demand disagreement, they demand boundaries, they demand you occupy space with your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And that's where the pattern of just being pleasant collapses, because it was built on avoidance, not connection, on image control, not mutual respect. What really connects people isn't absence of conflict, it's capacity to move through it, to say this hurt me, to hear you're hurting me, to adjust without destroying. But this requires something that was trained out of those who only learned to agree. It requires conscious vulnerability, not the vulnerability of being hurt in silence, but the vulnerability of showing yourself and trusting the relationship can withstand truth. There's a form of care that involves honesty, even when it hurts. That says no when needed. That confronts when necessary, not out of cruelty, but because it respects the other enough not to pretend, not to build relationship on lies of omission, not to make the other responsible for guessing needs that were never communicated. This type of care may seem less kind on the surface, but it's the only one that doesn't corrode whoever practices it. People break not because they were too honest, they break because they weren't honest enough, because they spent so much time managing how they're seen that they lost touch with who they really are, because they built entire identity on being needed, useful, pleasant, and forgot that real connection doesn't come from utility. It comes from mutual recognition. And you can't be recognized if you never showed yourself. The fragmentation isn't dramatic. There's no single moment of collapse. It's more subtle. It's waking up one day and realizing nobody really knows you. That all relationships were built on edited versions of who you are. That you spent so much time being what you thought you needed to be that you're not sure what remains when you stop trying. It's the feeling of having done everything right, of having been a good person and still being deeply alone. And maybe, just maybe, realizing there were two different types of goodness all along, and you chose the one that breaks. This behavioral pattern is just one of the ways early psychological strategies can shape an entire life. In the next video, another mechanism operating silently will be analyzed, creating consequences rarely connected to their origin. Click the video on screen to continue understanding how invisible patterns structure human behavior.